Mason Blackwood stood by the panoramic window of his 50th floor office, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. His real estate empire stretched across the city, and every new skyscraper on the horizon was a monument to his success. At 36, he was one of the wealthiest men in America, his name synonymous with luxury and power. It was also synonymous with something else, a terrible temper. "How could this have happened?" he snarled, spinning toward his assistant Ava, who stood by the door with a tablet in her hand, trying to remain calm. "I lost the Midtown contract because of some clerical error." "Mr. Blackwood, I tried to warn you about the issues with the environmental permits 2 weeks ago," Ava replied, her tone professional, though her hands trembled slightly. "I sent 3 emails and left memos." "Memos?" Mason scoffed, running his fingers through his dark hair. "I'm supposed to read memos while running a multi-billion-dollar company? It's your job to make sure things like this don't happen." Ava bit her lip, swallowing a retort. It was her last day. After 2 years as Mason Blackwood's assistant, she'd had enough. She was the 8th assistant in 5 years to quit because of his explosive personality. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," she said simply, placing the tablet on his desk. "I'm leaving my formal resignation. My 2-week notice ends today." Mason frowned, as if only now remembering she had quit. "Right. Your resignation," he sighed heavily. "Has HR found a replacement yet?" "Yes," Ava replied, unable to suppress a slight smile. "She starts tomorrow." The next morning, Mason arrived at the office before 7. As always, he loved these early hours when the building was still quiet, and he could plan his day without interruption. A cup of freshly brewed coffee was waiting on his desk, black, no sugar, exactly how he liked it. Beside it lay a neatly prepared schedule for the day and several documents requiring his signature. This was a nice change. Ava usually came in after him. The door to his office opened without a knock, which immediately sent a spike of irritation through him. A woman he had never seen before walked in with a confident stride. She was of average height, slender, with auburn hair tied back in a simple bun. She wore a well-tailored navy suit and thin-framed glasses. She looked to be around 30, but there was something about her that commanded attention. Perhaps her posture, straight and self-assured, or the intense gaze of her green eyes, which sized him up without a hint of fear or subservience. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice both professional and melodic. "I'm Sophia Miller, your new assistant." Mason eyed her from head to toe. "You enter my office without knocking, Ms. Miller?" The woman raised a delicate eyebrow. "The door was open, and according to the schedule I prepared for you, we were supposed to discuss today's meetings at 7:15. "It's 7:15, she said, pointing to an elegant watch on her wrist. Mason glanced at his own watch, an expensive Swiss chronograph. Indeed, it was exactly 7:15. "I arrived early to familiarize myself with the office and prepare everything for your arrival," Sophia continued, walking to his desk and placing a tablet in front of him. "You'll notice I've moved the meeting with the Singapore investors to 9 instead of 10. Their flight is landing earlier than scheduled, and this will give us more time to discuss the Brooklyn Heights project before the afternoon board meeting." Mason frowned, surprised by her initiative and confidence. "Who authorized you to change my schedule?" Sophia looked him directly in the eye, showing not a sliver of nervousness. "My job description includes managing your time effectively, Mr. Blackwood. If I had to consult you on every minor adjustment that is clearly beneficial to the company, I wouldn't be very useful, would I?" Mason opened his mouth to deliver a sharp retort, but had to admit she had a point. He closed it and simply nodded. "Fine. What else have you changed about my day?" "I've cancelled your lunch with Director Kowalski," Sophia said matter-of-factly, swiping a finger across the tablet screen. "I reviewed his proposal and found 3 serious legal loopholes that could cost the company millions. I've ordered lunch to be delivered to the office so we can review the documents together, and I've rescheduled the meeting with Kowalski for next week, after our legal concerns have been presented to him by the legal department." Mason felt his eyebrows rise in astonishment. If Ava had done something like this, he would have flown into a rage. But the way Sophia presented it, factual, logical, and with a clear focus on the company's best interests, left him with no room to argue. "You read Kowalski's proposal?" he asked in disbelief. "It's over 100 pages of technical details." "I was hired to be your right hand, Mr. Blackwood," Sophia replied, a faint smile touching the corners of her mouth. "And I always do my job thoroughly. Here," she handed him the tablet. "I've highlighted the problematic clauses on pages 24, 58, and 82. Mason scanned the document, his surprise growing with every swipe. She was right. She had identified the exact same issues he would have noticed if he'd had time to read it carefully. "Did you study law?" he asked, handing the tablet back. "Economics and management at NYU, followed by an MBA in London," she answered. "But I spent 3 years working for a law firm specializing in real estate law before moving to the corporate sector." Mason had to admit he was impressed. Maybe HR had done something right for once. The day passed with surprising efficiency. Every meeting started and ended on time. The documents he needed were always at hand, and Sophia demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs before he even voiced them. But the real test came in the afternoon, during a video conference with potential investors from Germany. Midway through Mason's presentation, the connection began to stutter, and the image froze. Mason felt the familiar wave of anger begin to build inside him. "What the hell?" he snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. "Can no one in this company provide a stable internet connection? I pay a fortune for the best technology, and it still fails." Normally, this was the point where his assistant would panic, trying to fix the problem while enduring his wrath. But Sophia remained unfazed. "Mr. Blackwood," she said calmly but firmly, "please calm down. That isn't helpful." Mason stared at her in disbelief. No one in the company dared to speak to him that way. "Excuse me," he asked in an icy tone. "I said to calm down," Sophia repeated, meeting his gaze head-on. "I will resolve the connection issue in 1 minute, but your yelling only makes it harder for me to concentrate and needlessly stresses everyone in the room." Before he could respond, Sophia turned to the IT technician who was hovering by the door, visibly flustered. "Adam, please switch the connection to the backup server and have the conference room on the 2nd floor prepped in case we need to relocate," she instructed calmly. "My apologies for the disruption, everyone. We'll be back online shortly." Then she turned back to Mason. "Please take a deep breath and prepare to resume your presentation in 30 seconds. Everything will be fine." To his own astonishment, Mason did exactly as she said. He took a deep breath and sat back in his chair, watching as Sophia and the IT tech quickly and efficiently resolved the problem. Within a minute, the connection was restored, and Mason was able to continue his presentation as if nothing had happened. After the day ended, as the last employees were leaving, Mason sat alone in his office, reviewing documents and reflecting on the day's events. The door opened, and Sophia walked in with 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee. "I thought you could use some caffeine since you're staying late," she said, placing one of the cups on his desk. Mason looked at her with curiosity. "Thank you," he said, which was a rarity in itself. "Ms. Miller—" "Please call me Sophia," she interrupted, taking a seat in the chair opposite him. "Sophia," he repeated, feeling an odd shyness he hadn't experienced in years. "I wanted to say that He hesitated. "I'm pleased with your work today." Sophia smiled faintly, taking a sip of her coffee. "That's good," she replied simply. "But if I may be frank, Mr. Blackwood, you need to work on your temper." Mason felt his back stiffen. "Excuse me? Your explosive nature is known throughout the industry," Sophia said matter-of-factly, without a trace of fear. "It's not a good reputation for someone in your position. Besides, it's inefficient. When you yell, people stop thinking about solutions and start thinking about how to avoid your anger. That leads to problems being hidden instead of solved." Mason stared at her in silence, completely taken aback by her directness. No one has ever said that to my face, he admitted finally. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Sophia replied, standing up and gathering her handbag. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood. Please don't stay too late, she added, heading for the door. You have an important meeting at 8 in the morning, and you'll need to be well rested. As the door closed behind her, Mason sat for a long moment, staring into space. Who was this woman who dared to tell him to his face what no one else had the courage to? And why, instead of flying into a rage, did he feel something entirely different, a kind of admiration and curiosity? The sound of his phone broke his reverie. A notification lit up the screen, a message from Sophia. I've sent you the updated schedule for tomorrow. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Mason smiled involuntarily. Something told him that working with Sophia Miller was going to be completely different from anything he had ever experienced before. The following weeks at Blackwood Investments brought changes no one had expected, least of all, Mason himself. Although he still had occasional outbursts of anger, Sophia learned to anticipate and neutralize them before they could escalate to a level that terrorized the staff. One morning, as Mason walked into his office, he found an unsettling sight on his desk. A business magazine with his picture on the cover and the headline, "The Real Estate Tyrant." How long can Mason Blackwood afford the luxury of a bad temper? What is this? He growled as Sophia entered the office with his morning coffee. The latest issue of Wall Street Weekly, she answered calmly, placing the cup on his desk. I thought you should see it before the board meeting. The article was written by Catherine Wells. Wells. Mason frowned. That reporter I refused to give an interview to last month? The very same, Sophia confirmed, sitting down opposite him. I've read the article. It's quite ruthless. It quotes former employees who describe you as, and I quote, a narcissistic tyrant incapable of empathy. Mason felt his face flush with anger. This is unacceptable. Call our lawyer. We'll sue them for libel. Sophia sighed, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, that would be a mistake. A lawsuit would only lend credibility to the article and extend its life in the media. Besides, she hesitated. Besides what? Mason snapped. Besides, most of it is true, Sophia said, looking him directly in the eye. You are a difficult boss. You have an explosive temper. People are afraid of you. Those are facts, not libel. Mason opened his mouth to protest, but Sophia raised a hand in a gesture that commanded silence. A gesture that a month ago would have sent him into a fury, but now, to his own surprise, it worked. Instead of wasting time and money on a pointless lawsuit, I propose a different strategy, she continued. A change of image. Mason snorted. You sound like a PR consultant. What do you suggest? I start hugging employees and handing out candy? Sophia smiled faintly, and the expression made her usually serious face suddenly, strikingly attractive. Mason caught himself holding his breath. Nothing so drastic, she replied. For a start, you could begin by genuinely changing your approach to your staff. Less yelling, more listening. Then some community involvement. You could use a portion of the company's profits to support the local community. And finally, an interview with a competing magazine where you show a different side of Mason Blackwood. Mason frowned, considering her words. He didn't like the idea, but he had to admit the article could harm his business. Investors didn't like negative publicity. I'll think about it, he said finally, which in his vocabulary was the closest thing to agreement. Excellent, Sophia stood, straightening her suit jacket. Now, we have 15 minutes until the board meeting. I've prepared notes for you on all the agenda items, she said, handing him the tablet. Please pay special attention to point 4. The finance department is proposing cuts that I believe are short-sighted. Mason took the tablet, impressed as always by her professionalism and preparation. Sophia, he stopped her as she headed for the door. Thank you. She glanced back at him over her shoulder with a slight smile. You're welcome, Mr. Blackwood. It's my job. But they both knew she was doing far more than her job required. A few days later, Mason found himself in a completely new situation. Giving an interview to Fortune magazine, sitting in his spacious penthouse apartment overlooking the East River. Sophia's idea, of course. "Mr. Blackwood, people say you're a ruthless businessman who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals," said the journalist Anna Chen, switching on her recorder. "Is that true?" Mason opened his mouth to give his standard answer, that business wasn't for the faint of heart, that success required determination. But then he glanced at Sophia, who was sitting discreetly in a corner of the room, watching him intently. He remembered their conversation from the day before, when she had prepped him for this interview. "People want to see a human being, not a money-making machine," she had told him. "Show them something real, something personal." "I think we all have many sides," he answered finally, surprising himself. "I'm demanding, that's true. I have high standards for myself and for others. But ruthless, no, I don't think that's a fair description." Anna raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his response. "And yet, you have a reputation for having an explosive temper." Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophia had come to recognize as a sign of his unease. "My temper," he began, searching for the right words. "It's something I'm working on. It's not easy to admit you have a problem, but yes, sometimes I react too emotionally. It's not an excuse, but I grew up in difficult circumstances. My father left when I was 8, and my mother worked 2 jobs to support us. I learned to fight for everything I have." Sophia sat up straighter, surprised. She had never heard Mason talk about his childhood before. "That's interesting," Anna leaned forward. "Most people don't know you started from nothing." "Because I don't like talking about it," Mason admitted. "It's not part of the image I've built. But yes, I grew up in a small apartment on the Lower East Side with no luxuries. I made my first million when I was 24, on a risky investment everyone thought was crazy. Since then, well, it hasn't always been easy." "And what about your personal life?" Anna asked. "The tabloids speculate about your flings with models and actresses, but you've never been in a serious relationship, have you?" Mason felt his body tense. This was a topic he hated. "My personal life is private," he answered coolly. "But no, I haven't been in a long-term relationship. My work takes up most of my time." "Aren't you lonely?" Anna pressed. Mason looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, considering his answer. He could give his standard rehearsed response about finding happiness in success and achievements. But something, maybe Sophia's presence, maybe the exhaustion of pretending, made him say something different. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I am." Sophia felt her heart ache at those words. For the first time, she saw Mason Blackwood as a man of flesh and blood, not the arrogant millionaire she worked for. After the interview ended and Anna had left, Mason sank onto the sofa, clearly drained. "Was it that bad?" Sophia asked, approaching him with a glass of water. "I don't know," he admitted, taking the water gratefully. "I feel like I just got undressed in public." "That was brave," Sophia said softly, "to show your true self." Mason looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He noticed the faint freckles on her nose, usually hidden by makeup, and the delicate line between her brows that appeared when she was thoughtful. "I'm not used to being vulnerable," he admitted. "Vulnerability isn't a weakness, Mr. Blackwood," Sophia replied. "Sometimes it's the greatest strength." Mason felt a strange sensation in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, as if something hard and cold was beginning to melt. "Sophia," he said suddenly, "could you—" He hesitated. "Could you call me by my first name, when we're alone?" Sophia raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Of course, Mason," she replied, and the name sounded strangely intimate on her lips. For a moment they looked at each other in silence, until Sophia cleared her throat and glanced at her watch. "I should go," she said. "You have an early meeting with the architects tomorrow." Mason nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. "Yes, of course. Thank you for the support today." "You're welcome," she smiled faintly. "See you tomorrow, Mason." When she left, Mason stood by the window, watching her get into a taxi on the street below. He felt a strange unease at the thought of her leaving, and an even stranger desire for her to stay. The next day, the atmosphere in the office was tense. A deadline for a key project was approaching, and the architectural team was late with the final plans. Mason felt his patience wearing thin as he checked his watch for the third time, and the architects still hadn't arrived for the meeting. Where are they? He snapped at Sophia, who was sitting beside him in the conference room, reviewing documents. They're already 15 minutes late. I called their office, she replied calmly. They're stuck in traffic on the FDR Drive. They'll be here in 10 minutes. We can't afford delays. Mason slammed his fist on the table, and a few junior employees sitting further down flinched. This project has to be ready for next week. Sophia gave him a warning look. Mason, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time in front of other employees. Remember our conversation about managing your temper? Mason glared at her, but something in her eyes, not fear but disappointment, made him feel a pang of shame. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. You're right, he admitted just as quietly. I'm sorry. The employees exchanged surprised glances. No one had ever heard Mason Blackwood apologize. When the meeting finally began, Mason surprised everyone with his composure. Instead of yelling at the architects for being late, he asked specific questions and listened attentively to their answers. When one of the younger team members, visibly nervous, dropped a folder of documents, Mason himself bent down to help pick them up. It's all right, he said to the young man, who was staring at him as if expecting an eruption. It happens to the best of us. After the meeting, once everyone had left, Sophia lingered, gathering her notes. That was impressive, she said, not looking at Mason. What was? He asked, though he knew perfectly well what she was talking about. Your composure, your kindness. She looked at him with a smile. Who would have thought the great Mason Blackwood could be nice? Don't get used to it, he replied, but the corners of his mouth twitched into a smile. It was a one-time thing. Of course. She nodded seriously, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. Absolutely unique. For a moment they looked at each other, and something unspoken hung in the air between them. Sophia was the first to look away. I should get back to work, she said, heading for the door. You have lunch with the mayor at 1. Mason nodded, watching her leave. As the door closed behind her, he realized he was smiling for no reason at all. A few days later, Mason's interview was published in Fortune. Sophia brought a copy to his office, placing it carefully on his desk. It looks good, she said, pointing to his photo on the cover. It wasn't a typical formal shot in a suit, but a more casual one. Mason in an unbuttoned shirt, leaning against the railing of his terrace, with New York City sprawling behind him. He looked younger, more approachable. Mason scanned the article, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and relief. Anna had portrayed him as a complex man with a difficult past, not a one-dimensional business tyrant. What do you think? He asked Sophia, who was standing by his desk waiting for his reaction. I think it's good for people to see the real Mason Blackwood, she answered with a smile. The one I'm starting to get to know. Mason felt his heart quicken at her words. He was about to say something, but they were interrupted by Sophia's phone ringing. Excuse me, I have to take this, she said, glancing at the screen. It's my sister. She stepped out into the hallway, and Mason returned to reading the article. A few minutes later, Sophia came back, her face pale and tense. Is everything all right? Mason asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. My niece, Maya, had an accident at school, Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. She broke her arm. My sister is out of the country, and Maya is at the hospital. I need to... She hesitated. I need to ask for the afternoon off. Of course, Mason replied without a moment's hesitation. Go immediately. Do you need a ride? Sophia shook her head. I'll get a taxi. No. Mason stood up, grabbing his keys from the desk. My driver will take you. It'll be faster. I'll cancel my afternoon meetings. Sophia looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Mason. I really appreciate it." "Let me know how Maya is doing," he said, walking her to the door. "And don't worry about the office. I'll handle everything." After Sophia left, Mason returned to his desk and started going through his calendar, figuring out which meetings he could postpone and which he had to handle personally. He was surprised by how much he worried about Sophia and her niece, a person he had never even met. "What's happening to me?" he thought, looking at the spot where Sophia usually sat during their morning briefings. And why did he feel so strangely empty, knowing he wouldn't see her until the next day? Late that evening, as Mason was finishing up in his empty office, his phone rang. Sophia's number flashed on the screen. "Sophia, how's Maya?" he asked, not hiding the concern in his voice. "She's better," Sophia replied, her voice tired but calm. "They put her in a cast. Luckily, it's a simple fracture. It should heal quickly. Thank you for your support today." "Of course," Mason said. "I'm glad everything is okay." There was a moment of silence, which Sophia finally broke. "Mason, could you do me one more favor?" "Of course," he answered without hesitation. "What is it?" Maya has to stay with me for a few days until my sister gets back from her business trip," Sophia explained. "I was wondering if I could work from home for that time, or maybe bring her to the office sometimes." "I understand if it's a problem." "It's not a problem," Mason interrupted. "Work from home for as long as you need, and if you want to come to the office, Maya is more than welcome. We can set up a space for her in my private conference room." "Really?" Sophia's voice was filled with disbelief. "I didn't expect that I'd be understanding." He finished for her with a hint of bitterness. "Yes, I know what my image is." "That's not what I meant," Sophia said quickly. "It's just, thank you, really." "You're welcome," Mason replied softly. "Good night, Sophia." "Good night, Mason." After they hung up, Mason sat for a long moment in the silence of his office, staring into the darkness beyond the window. He realized that Sophia Miller had become more than just his assistant. She had become someone he cared about, the first person in a very, very long time. And that thought both terrified him and filled him with a strange warmth that he couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, ignore. Maya turned out to be a 9-year-old miniature version of Sophia. The same intelligence sparkled in her green eyes, though she was far less reserved than her aunt. With her arm in a colorful cast, covered in signatures from her classmates, she took up an honorary spot in Mason's private conference room, which had been temporarily transformed into a child-friendly space with books, crayons, and a tablet loaded with educational games. "Are you really the boss of this whole building?" Maya asked as Mason entered the room, carrying a folder of documents. Sophia, who was sitting next to the girl helping her with homework, gave Mason an apologetic look. "Maya, remember what we talked about? Mr. Blackwood is very busy and—" "Actually, yes," Mason interrupted, coming closer and sitting across from Maya. "I own this company and several other buildings in the city." Maya's eyes widened. "Wow, that's like Monopoly." "My mom always says I'm too good at that game," she added proudly. Mason couldn't help but smile. "Really? Maybe we'll have to play sometime, see if you can beat me." "Mason," Sophia cleared her throat, the use of his first name still sounding strangely intimate. "Did you come for the documents for the investor meeting?" "Yes," he confirmed, handing her the folder. "But I have a minute. What are you two up to?" "Math," Maya sighed dramatically. "Fractions, they're awful." "They're not so bad once you get the hang of it," Mason said, sliding Maya's notebook toward him. "Let me show you a trick." Sophia watched in amazement as Mason patiently explained the concept of fractions to Maya, using simple analogies and drawings. She would never have guessed that the man who could bring grown professionals to tears with his anger could have so much patience for a child. "You know what?" Maya said, after finally solving a difficult problem. "You're a better teacher than Ms. Kowalski. She always gets annoyed when I ask questions." "Well, teachers have a lot on their plates," Mason replied. "But it's always good to ask questions. That's the only way to learn anything." He glanced at his watch and sighed. I have to go now. Good luck with the rest of your homework, Maya. Thanks, Mr. Mason, the girl replied, waving with her good hand. As Mason left, Sophia watched him with a look of disbelief on her face. Aunt Sophia, Maya said suddenly, Mr. Mason is nice. You said he was scary and everyone's afraid of him. Sophia felt her cheeks flush. Well, people change, sweetie, she replied quietly. Sometimes they're completely different from how they seem at first. The next few days settled into an unexpected routine. Mason would pop into the conference room under various pretexts, bringing documents, asking Sophia for advice on some matter. Each time, he would find a moment to talk with Maya, sometimes bringing her small gifts, colorful pens, a notebook with a unicorn, or a book about space, after he learned she was interested in astronomy. You don't have to do this, you know, Sophia told him one evening, after they were left alone once Maya had fallen asleep on the conference room sofa, exhausted from her day. Do what? Mason asked, feigning innocence. Spoil her, Sophia said, gesturing to the new book about stars that Maya was clutching even in her sleep. The gifts, the attention. It's very sweet, but you really don't have to. Mason looked at the sleeping girl, his face softening in a way that still surprised Sophia. I like doing it, he admitted quietly. She reminds me of myself at her age. The same curiosity, the same determination, except I didn't have anyone to support me. My mother was too busy surviving, and my father... He trailed off, clearly reluctant to continue that topic. You've never talked about your childhood, Sophia observed, sitting beside him, besides what you said in the interview. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair, the gesture Sophia was beginning to recognize as a sign of his vulnerability. There's not much to tell. Classic story of a kid from a working-class neighborhood, an alcoholic father who eventually left us, a mother working 2 jobs, a kid who swore he would never be poor. And you kept that promise, Sophia said. Yes, Mason confirmed, but there was no pride in his voice, only a kind of emptiness. But sometimes I wonder at what cost. Sophia didn't know what to say. This unexpected honesty from Mason, the man she had met as an arrogant, closed-off person, made her feel strangely moved. Maya is going home tomorrow, right? Mason asked suddenly, changing the subject. Her mother is back from her trip? Yes, Sophia confirmed. Dominique gets back tomorrow morning. She'll pick Maya up in the afternoon. She'll be missed, Mason said, and Sophia wasn't sure if he was talking about himself or her. She brightened up the place. Yes, Sophia agreed, looking at her niece tenderly. She has that gift. Mason looked at Sophia, studying her profile in the dim light of the evening office. Just like her aunt, he said softly. Sophia turned to look at him, surprised by the confession. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them breathed. Something electric hung between them, something they had both been feeling for some time, but neither had dared to name. Mason, Sophia began, but she was interrupted by the chime of her phone, an alarm reminding her of Maya's medicine. I'm sorry, I have to... Of course. Mason stood up quickly, as if waking from a trance. It's late, I should go. Good night, Sophia. Good night, Mason, she replied, watching him leave the room, wondering what had just happened, and what would have happened if her phone hadn't rung. The next day, Maya was picked up by her mother, Dominique, a woman who looked like an older version of Sophia, but with a warmer, more open disposition. Thank you for everything, Dominique said, shaking Mason's hand as he came to say goodbye to Maya. Sophia told me how helpful you were. It was a pleasure, Mason answered honestly. Maya is a special girl. She has a talent for math. And for astronomy, Maya added enthusiastically, hugging her new book about stars. Mr. Mason said he might take me to the planetarium someday. Dominique raised her eyebrows, glancing questioningly at her sister, who blushed slightly. We'll see, Sophia said diplomatically. For now, you two should get going, so you can make it to your ballet class, Maya. After a warm farewell as Dominique and Maya left, Sophia and Mason were left alone in the lobby. An awkward silence fell between them for a moment. So, Mason began, Back to normal, Sophia finished with a slight smile. You have a board meeting in an hour. I've prepared all the materials. Mason nodded, but he looked like he wanted to say something else. In the end, however, he just sighed. Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to go prepare. As they returned to their respective offices, they both felt that something had shifted, as if a chapter had been closed before it had even properly begun. A few days later, Mason was in his office reviewing documents for a new project when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Mason Blackwood, he answered professionally. Mr. Blackwood? He heard a familiar voice. This is Dominique Miller, Sophia's sister. Mason sat up straighter, surprised. Ms. Miller, how can I help you? I wanted to ask. She hesitated. Is Sophia at work today? No, Mason answered, frowning. She took the day off, said she had some errands to run. Is something wrong? Dominique sighed heavily. Today is her former fiancé's birthday, she said quietly. Adam, he died in a car accident 2 years ago. Sophia always takes this day off and I'm worried about her. She's not answering her phone. Mason felt his heart stop for a moment. Sophia had never mentioned a deceased fiancé. She had never mentioned any Adam. I see, he said, feeling a sudden urge to act. Do you know where she might be? She usually goes to the cemetery and then... Dominique hesitated. There's a place by the East River where Adam proposed to her. A bench in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Sometimes she sits there. Thank you, Mason said, already standing up and grabbing his jacket. I'll check on her. Really? Dominique's voice held surprise, but also relief. I would be so grateful. Sophia always pretends to be strong, but I understand, Mason interrupted. Don't worry. I'll find her. An hour later, Mason was walking along the riverfront, scanning the area. The morning rain had stopped, leaving behind damp air and an empty park. Finally, he spotted a lone figure sitting on a bench with a view of the river, a slender woman in a dark coat, her hair down and damp from the rain. Sophia looked different than she did at the office. No makeup, no perfect hairstyle, no professional armor. She looked fragile and boundlessly sad. Sophia, he said softly, approaching the bench. She jumped, spinning around. Her eyes were red from crying. Mason, what are you? She trailed off, clearly shocked by his presence. How did you know? Your sister called, he admitted, sitting next to her on the bench but maintaining a respectful distance. She was worried about you. Sophia sighed, looking away. Dominique always worries, needlessly. I'm a grown woman. I can handle it. I know, Mason said. But sometimes even grown-ups need someone beside them. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the dark waters of the river flow lazily under the bridge. Adam was an architect, Sophia said suddenly, not looking at Mason. We met in college. He was full of life, always smiling, always had some crazy idea, the opposite of me. Mason listened in silence, letting her speak. He proposed to me here, she continued, gesturing to the bench where they sat, exactly 2 weeks before the accident. We hadn't even had a chance to announce our engagement to all our friends. And then, her voice broke. Then he was driving in the rain, just like today. A truck skidded. He didn't stand a chance. Mason felt a painful tightness in his chest. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but all words seemed empty and inadequate. I'm sorry, he said finally. I didn't know. No one at work knows, Sophia replied, shrugging. I don't like people looking at me with pity. Poor Sophia. She lost her fiancé. I'd rather they see me as a professional, not a victim of a tragedy. I understand, Mason said. And he truly did. He himself hated it when people saw him only as the poor kid from the Lower East Side who grew up with trauma. Sometimes I wonder, Sophia continued, her voice now quieter, more reflective, what my life would be like if he were alive. We'd be married by now. Maybe we'd have a child. I certainly wouldn't be working for you, she added with a faint smile, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. Then I'd still be terrorizing my assistants, Mason replied, smiling back. So maybe some things happen for a reason. Sophia looked at him, and something flickered in her eyes that he couldn't quite interpret. "Do you believe in fate, Mason?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I do believe that people come into our lives for a reason, and that they leave a mark, even when they're gone." Sophia nodded, and tears welled up in her eyes again. Without thinking, Mason put his arm around her, pulling her close. To his surprise, she didn't pull away, but leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the tears flow. They sat like that for a long time, in a silence broken only by the hum of the river and the distant sounds of the city. They didn't need words. Sometimes presence means more than any words of comfort. Finally, Sophia straightened up, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming, for not trying to comfort me with clichés." "No, clichés aren't my specialty," Mason replied with a slight smile. "I'm better known for my brutal honesty." "That's true," Sophia admitted, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. "It's one of the things She broke off, as if she'd caught herself saying something she shouldn't have. "Things you," Mason prompted, looking at her intently. Sophia looked away, suddenly embarrassed. "Things I value in you," she finished quietly. "As a boss," she added quickly. Mason felt a pang of disappointment but didn't press her. It wasn't the right moment. "It's cold," he said instead. "You should go home before you catch a chill." Sophia nodded, getting up from the bench. "Yes, I think you're right." "I'll walk you," Mason offered, standing up as well. "You don't have to," she began, but he interrupted her by gently placing a hand on her arm. "I want to," he said simply. The walk to Sophia's apartment passed in comfortable silence. When they reached her pre-war building in a quiet part of Brooklyn, Mason hesitated. "Thank you again," Sophia said, standing at her door, "for everything. And I'm sorry you had to see me in that state." "Don't apologize," Mason replied. "I'm glad I could be there for you, and Sophia," he hesitated, "if you ever want to talk about Adam or anything else, I'm here." Sophia looked at him with gratitude and something more, something warm and deep that made his heart beat faster. "Good night, Mason," she said softly. "Good night, Sophia," he replied, watching her enter the building. As the door closed behind her, Mason stood on the street for another moment, looking at the old building. He realized that Sophia had become important to him, someone he cared for in a way that went far beyond the boss-assistant relationship. And that thought, instead of scaring him as it once would have, filled him with a strange sense of peace. As if something in his life was finally starting to make sense. With that feeling, he got into a cab, heading back to his empty, luxurious penthouse, which suddenly seemed far less welcoming than the modest building in Brooklyn. The next day, Sophia didn't show up at the office. Instead, she sent Mason a message. "Sorry for the absence. I need one more day. I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for yesterday. S." Mason replied curtly. "Take all the time you need. Don't apologize. M." He spent the day trying to focus on work, but his thoughts kept returning to Sophia, to her sadness, her strength, the feeling of her head on his shoulder. He knew something between them had changed, but he wasn't sure what it meant or what he should do about it. Late in the afternoon, as most of the employees had already left, Mason was sitting in his office, browsing through documents with little interest, when he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he said without looking up. "Hi." He heard a familiar voice that made him immediately raise his head. Sophia stood in the doorway, but she looked different than usual. She was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of an elegant suit, and her hair was loosely down. She looked younger, more vulnerable. "Sophia." Mason stood up, surprised to see her. "I wasn't expecting you today." "I know." She entered the office, closing the door behind her. "But I had to. I wanted to talk to you." Mason gestured to the chair opposite his desk, but to his surprise, Sophia shook her head. "Not as your assistant," she said quietly. "As me, Sophia." Mason nodded, walking around his desk and leading her to the small seating area in the corner of his office. two comfortable armchairs, and a low table where he usually held more informal conversations. "I'm listening," he said as they sat down. Sophia took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "Yesterday I showed you a part of myself that no one at work sees," she began, "and I realized it wasn't as hard as I thought. That I feel safe with you." Mason watched her intently, not daring to interrupt. "For the past 2 years, I've been living like an automaton," Sophia continued. "Work, home, occasional family gatherings, no real emotions, no risks. It was safe, predictable. And then you came along." She looked him straight in the eye. "With your terrible temper, your arrogance, your intensity, and suddenly my life wasn't so orderly anymore." "I'm sorry," Mason offered with a slight smile, unsure if it was a compliment or a complaint. "Don't be sorry," Sophia replied, smiling back. It is good. You made me start feeling again. First irritation," she added with a playful glint in her eye. "Then something else." Mason felt his heart speed up. "Something else?" he repeated, leaning slightly toward her. Sophia hesitated, her smile fading, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "I'm scared, Mason," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared of what I'm feeling. I'm scared that if I let someone into my life again, I'll lose them again. I'm scared I'm not ready. And I'm scared I'll ruin our professional relationship, which works well, right?" "It works perfectly," Mason agreed. "You're the best assistant I've ever had. So maybe we should just—" Sophia began, but Mason interrupted her by reaching for her hand. "But you're also something more," he said softly. "Someone who made me start seeing the world differently. Someone who makes me want to be a better person." Sophia looked at their joined hands, various emotions warring in her eyes. Fear, hope, desire. "What are you proposing?" she asked finally, looking up. "I don't know," Mason admitted honestly. "I've never been in this situation before. Usually I just take what I want without thinking about the consequences. But with you, I want to do this right, whatever that means." Sophia smiled faintly. "To me, it means slowly," she said. "Step by step. No rush and no pressure." "I can do that," Mason replied, squeezing her hand. "For you, I can learn to be patient." For a moment they looked at each other in silence, the air between them seeming to vibrate with unspoken emotions and possibilities. "So," Sophia began, her cheeks flushing slightly, "maybe we could start with dinner, somewhere outside the office, where we're not a boss and an assistant, just Mason and Sophia." Mason felt his heart fill with warmth. "That sounds perfect," he said with a smile. "When?" "Tomorrow," Sophia suggested. "I know a small restaurant in the West Village, away from the places where businessmen and journalists hang out." "Tomorrow," Mason agreed, unable to hold back a wide smile. "It's a date." Sophia blushed even more at the word, but didn't deny it. "It's a date," she confirmed, standing up. "And now I really should go. I'm back to work tomorrow, and I need to prepare." Mason stood up too, still holding her hand. "I'll walk you out," he offered. "You don't have to," she demurred, but without conviction. "I can find my own way." "I know," he said simply, "but I want to." And this time, as they walked together through the deserted office, their hands remained linked, as if it were the most natural connection in the world.